Hi, welcome to Neural Search Talks. I'm Fernando Rejon from Zeta Alpha. We are here at lovely, rainy Berlin at Berlin Buzzwords 2023. I'm sitting next to Atita Arora. Welcome. So Atita, can you maybe briefly introduce yourself?
I am working in domain of search since 2008, so pretty old in the industry per se. So I've seen the transformation that it took in like different folds, and particularly at Open Source Connections, I'm a search relevance consultant.
And how are you enjoying Berlin Buzzwords this year?
Absolutely lovely. I think this time it's kind of really great that vectors and everything around LLMs and it's gone beyond machine learning, kind of a significant buzz that used to be like.
Yeah. So I remember last year there was some talks about vector search, but nowadays it seems like everyone's about generative AI, vector search. So you had a very nice talk about getting started with vector search. Can you maybe explain what are the requirements for the clients to start looking at this area of search?
I'm basically trying to introduce a framework in which people think about vectorizing as nothing different from implementing a regular search engine. So when you implement a regular search engine in any business per se, you would think about what are my requirements on the indexing side, what are my requirements on the searching side. Of course, you would understand that what kind of data is coming in, how do I need to present this data? And you need to think about like what kind of changes are involved, like on the searching side, making sure that you deliver value. So similarly, I've tried to introduce a framework called Vectorize, which talks about you need to make sure that you add required configurations, and you spend some time at least to start with this approach, picking up what kind of model would be suitable. So specifically the transformer models. I've had struggle with that in the past as well, because just like everyone, I also started with BERT. Obviously, the results weren't that great. So, and being in the industry for so long, I mean, I've been so used to BM25, it's really hard for me to, think about something else, because I have my ways around to, twist and turn BM25 in the way I want the results to be, or maybe the client wants them to be. So it was, I would say, like a struggle with myself initially, that if I could use something other than BM25 to get more, I would say, better results or improve the user experience. So I think, which is why this entire framework is kind of, try to put down like that framework of mine that I went through during this process. So obviously, coming back to the process once again is like the changes that are required on the indexing side, which would require obviously a model that you need to use. With this model, you need to also determine in a way that what kind of data fields are important in your given use case. You need to make up specific, config changes to support vectors. For example, in case of any Lucene-based engine, you need to add like the TNN vector fields. And on top of it, you need to tweak a little bit about your indexing process, because they need to be processed in a different way. So try to provide this framework in Chorus, which is an open source tool. I introduced in my talk as well. And on the searching side, obviously, when we're talking about vectors, we need to have some sort of a service that gives you vectors, like that receives text and gives you vectors in the similar model. And I think this is one thing I would like to stress, because it also took me some time to understand that when I was really naive, that the models that you use to encode your data, these are the same models that you need to use while querying as well. Otherwise, you would not really get the expected results.
Exactly.
So I think this was kind of a gotcha for me. Similar, I think there was this another bump that I had was with the images. And I think images for me were not really working that great in the beginning, because I was processing them just like text. So I think this is also like hard learned lesson. I'm yet to write a blog about it when I improved it. So used a clip model, and I think I would say like images have been far really good, especially that I mentioned for the queries that involve anything visual, like style pattern, especially in the fashion and maybe anything to do with design domain. And colors is something which is inevitable, like present in any industry. And the third part is something which is very close to my heart, and because this was a part where a lot of teams came to me like, how can we get funding? How can we get budget from our approving team that this is actually going to work? So I would say like I spent a lot of time, and I was working with Cupid. I think added a lot of functionality to it, and I've tried to add a lot of visualization capabilities into Cupid, so that people who are working with data scientists and working with product owners per se as well, they can really showcase that what kind of improvement should they be looking at if they go vectors. So I think I tried to wrap everything into like this talk. So making sure like people understand that it's, first of all, not very difficult to begin with. To hop onto this journey, I think is not really difficult, because I mean, the first challenge that used to be there was like finding a model. And earlier people used to train the model with their data because they were not really freely available. I think Hugging Face has really lowered that bar now with commoditizing model and even data sets. Like if you don't want to use your data, you can pick up a publicly available data set as well, which is closer to your use case. I think the focus again should be on the experimentation part, because that's where you really prove the worth of if it's really a go-to approach in your given use case.
Yeah, makes sense. And I like that you try to kind of incorporate, textual search with images. And I remember last year there were also many talks about this multimodal retrieval. But where do you see kind of this future of, for example, in e-commerce or in fashion industry? How would you see this incorporated in UX?
I think that's a great question. I think this is another topic of discussion, which is currently led by Renee Kriegler from my organization, who's really focusing on, okay, I think the initial challenge was that we don't really have a way to capture all of that information. Now that we have a way to have this information captured, we have ways to show that visually this picture could be more similar to this other picture. Earlier, this used to be a challenge. So now that we have this capability, how would we present these results, making sure that this is communicating enough value to the customer who are using vectors, as well as like from the text point of view as well. So I think I would say like I won't really spill beans of his work, what he's doing, but there would be something out there soon about talking about like accommodating all of this buzz and all of these improvements onto the UI UX as well. But that's definitely something that that is like the next focus.
Interesting. And maybe talking a bit more about clients integrating this new way of searching. What do you see the challenges?
I think there could be several different challenges. From the first one, especially, is the lack of scales. I think people who really want to do this are the teams who are really agile. With agile, I don't essentially mean like bigger teams, because the agility somehow is related to your team size as well. Like how quickly can you deliver something? So felt like companies that are relatively smaller are more up for experimenting stuff rather than like bigger companies, because maybe the changes are huge, the approval process takes longer, there are multifold kind of complexity in like trying to go something that that is absolutely new and not really proven per se as of yet. So I would say like we have a couple of clients who are actually willing to give this a try, and they come from various different domains like fashion, e-commerce, of course, is definitely there. I think a lot of traction is getting from the clients who were thinking about, for example, from the designing domain, who have always had the struggle like, this particular pattern should look like this other pattern as well. So for the inspiration use cases, I think vectors are really getting called out for. And that's the way that we're seeing with our clients.
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned this inspiration. We were talking before the interview a bit about it. Can you maybe elaborate what is this concept?
So I think if I was to put about like the inspiration, because for example, for any visual per se domain, fashion is something that keeps coming to my mind. There are other domains as well. I don't want to call out any client name per se, but then in the interior designing as well, like people have catalogs for like this kind of finishing, this kind of tile, this kind of chair, this kind of rug. And I think these kind of domains have really struggled because you cannot really put all sort of like designing sense into your data set, no matter what. And as I think you might have seen, the recent talks as well, like from Joe, it becomes really hard when it comes to like labeling data by hand. It's expensive. Plus, if you have huge data, which is ought to be there when you are in such a domain, you would like to have a lot of diversity, a lot of, like products from different kind of styles as well. It becomes really hard to actually tag and label such kind of a data set. So I think, which is what is making a little bit of like, practical sense to try out vectors as well, because there are specific models, especially for like the fashion data set. There are models that I've used personally, which have performed much better than original clip model as well. So I've had results like which were presented to the clients, of course. I mean, if I was to show like a small maybe result set, just to brief, like I gave you an example before as well, like people looking for black shirt to go with blue jeans, and jeans being a little bit, rated higher, person would see only jeans in the result set. And I think that was initially the struggle. And when we tried to use the vector approach, we really saw like the black shirts.
Yeah, can you maybe tell me what are your predictions for Buzzwords next year?
Then I would say like that the buzz would continue about vectors, but I have a feeling, and I could be totally wrong here as well, maybe this would be a theme maybe 1 or 2 years later as well, is that once people are used to of trying off-the-shelf models, they would really want to achieve more. And the next step would be, as I showcased also, like just one slide about the fine tuning. And I think this is where people seem to be going next. So fine tuning, I feel, would become more of a need to be using these approaches appropriately. And that's what I feel is like, should be the next theme, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining this first interview at Berlin Buzzwords.